So I came across an article by the National Post today, and the author of the article sure had a lot of demands, right? And this article is following the synagogue shooting, and as we know, Trudeau is going to apologize for turning away 900 Jewish people in the 1930s because he likes to virtue signal and try to pander to minority groups to get their votes. Essentially, that's why he's just apologizing for what we do to residential people, what we did to aboriginals and residential schools. Even though like the previous government apologized for it, he just has to go and do it again to make sure that everybody knows that he's sorry for it too, even though we had absolutely nothing to do with it. Just like apologizing for this is stupid because we have absolutely no ownership to take responsibility for what people did 100 years ago. And even though they did turn those people away, that was their fucking right. Okay, so even then, it's not morally bad. Okay, because there's a lot of other countries that turned them down too, and we all have our own reasons for why we did it. Back in the day, they had their own reasons, and we don't need to be demonized for something that happened so long ago. I don't give a fuck. You don't give a fuck. You're just trying to use this, over our heads to try to manipulate us and get things out of us. This is what every group does. It doesn't really matter on race or whatever. If somebody sees an opportunity that they can make people feel bad about themselves or their history in order to get them to do things that they want, they're going to do it. They're going to, it's the same thing that, black groups in America do. They're like, oh, we're victims, give us this, give us that. Same thing that Aboriginals do here. Oh, we're victims, and Aboriginal schools, residential schools, and colonization, yada, yada, yada. Give us money, give us resources, and I'm not saying that's every person, because a lot of Aboriginal people, it's not them specifically or black people specifically. A lot of the times it's these groups that are running everything, that get all the money from the government, that they use their white guilt, and then they get money, and then they oftentimes hoard that money. And all the other regular poor native people, black people, poor white people, or whatever, they don't get that money. It's all the rich, all the people that are the race hustlers, that are the victim hustlers, are the ones that are getting a hold of that money anyways. So it's not like every person is nefariously working together to scam white people of their white guilt, but there are a lot of people in these groups, associations, whatever, Jewish, that are Jewish, that are Aboriginal, that are communist, socialist, feminist groups, whatever, that want to just make you feel bad about yourself and to give up more of your rights and to give more of your money away. But this guy is no different. And he starts off the article, complaining about how we're, racist, right? He's like, while the Jewish people have enjoyed a long and meaningful history in Canada, we have not always been welcome in this country, especially in our darkest hour. In the days leading up to the Second World War, more than 900 Jewish refugees aboard the MS St. Louis were given a rare opportunity to find safe harbor in Canada, but ultimately refused. Over a quarter of them subsequently perished at the hands of Nazis. So, only a quarter of them, still 3/4 survived, so, that's something. Even after the Holocaust, discrimination against Jews continued with quotas and academia, restrictive covenants against the purchase of land, and common exclusion from various public and private forums, all examples of ingrained societal anti-Semitism in Canada. My father still vividly recalls seeing signs that appeared on Canadian beachfronts screaming, "No dogs or Jews allowed." So, it's just more bringing up the past, bringing up how people in the past were racist and mean towards Jews, but that says nothing about the people today, right? And during the article, they're going to bring up points of people, how anti-Semitism is on the rise, etc. But Today, Jews remain the most targeted religious community for hate crimes in Canada. Across the country, from Kamloops to St. John's, members of our community continue to be subjected to anti-Semitic harassment, violence, and vandalism. A perennial reminder that after all this time, still many still view us as the other. And maybe one of the reasons why anti-Semitism could be rising is because of a lot of the Muslims that you're bringing into the country that whose enemy is essentially Jewish people, right? Like they don't like a lot of other people, but they really don't like Jews. So possibly bringing a lot of them in is a bad idea, right? And I am very skeptical about how a lot of these groups get their numbers about racist and anti-Semitic or whatever attacks, because I'm sure a lot of these attacks are probably hoaxes that they're bringing in. You don't know how many of them were committed by leftists to make it seem like there is more anti-Semitism going around. Like there was all of those graveyards that were being pushed over a little while ago, and it turns out it was a Jewish guy. There was another guy just a while ago in America, this black gay Democrat that went, I think, and vandalized the synagogue and all this shit to try to blame it to make conservatives look bad. And then there was another synagogue vandalized. It was by like a group of fucking black kids, right? But whenever a rock gets thrown into a Jewish window, anti-Semitism. Anytime somebody says Israel is bad for shooting 60 people at the border of Palestine, something that if America did to the invasion coming at their border right now, shooting 60 people or whatever, for even if they had like throwing rocks to people and shit, there would be a lot more shit, right? So nonetheless, it keeps going on, right? It's today, Jews remain the most targeted religious group for hate crimes in Canada, across the country, from Kamloops. But yeah, what I was saying was that, like, anytime you do criticize Israel nowadays, a lot of these groups, they will mark that down as anti-Semitism, as hate speech, right? So it's, I'm from a lot of Republicans too. Like, this is coming from the National Post, conservative publication, and they also scream anti-Semitism all the time, but a lot of the times it's just somebody saying like, Israel is bad for what they're doing or something, and they're like, anti-Semitism. And I'm like, okay, yeah, if you're saying death to all Jews and shit, sure, that's anti-Semitism. But another thing that what I don't like is all of these new made-up words: Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. Why can't we just say it's racist? Right? Like that thing applies. It can apply to everything, but we have to make up these weird definitions, right? There's no Christian phobia. There's no anti-Christianism, right? But people can be bigoted towards Christians. They cannot like them. People throw rocks through their windows all the time, but that's not getting marked down as a hate crime. It's just mischief or some bullshit like that. But I go on. The recent massacre at the synagogue in Pittsburgh serves a deadly testament to this fact. The Jewish community has too much frequently been the victim of terror attacks in Israel and elsewhere, right? So, once again, they're blaming that on, just people's growing hatred of Jewish people. And there is somewhat of a growing hatred of Jewish people. But we got to understand that, there is a lot of money being sent to Israel that should not be sent to Israel, right? And they, a lot of, like 80% of their oil supply, I'm pretty sure, comes from like Iraq. Is that a coincidence? America going to Iraq, the most amount of money that they give to people, to a country is Israel. Everybody has to support Israel, no matter what. No matter what they do, it's fucking bullshit. If you criticize it, you're an anti-Semite. Even though, if you look at the history of Israel, they did, like, what was this called? The Vaughan affair. The Vaughan affair refers to a failed Israeli covert operation, codenamed Operation Susanna, conducted in Egypt in the summer of 1954 as a part of a false flag operation. So, a group of Egyptian Jews were recruited by Israeli military intelligence to plant bombs inside Egyptian, American, and British-owned civilian targets, cinemas, libraries, and American educational centers. The bombs were timed to detonate several hours after closing time. The attacks were to be blamed on the Muslim Brotherhood, Egyptian communists, unspecified malcontents, or local nationalists, whatever, right? So, they have done type things like this in the past, and calling this out is not anti-Semitic. Talking about George Soros is not anti-Semitic. Talking about the influence that Jewish people and stuff, over-representation that they do have in some fields, and talking about these things is not anti-Semitic. And also disputing numbers at the Holocaust and stuff, that is also not anti-Semitic. People asking questions, it's not racist, okay? But in a recent massacre in the synagogue, but see, the synagogue massacre, like I said, it's all going to be used to censor and to create more of a martial type law. And this is exactly what this guy in the article is going to ask for, and I'll go more into detail. But the Jewish community has much too frequently been the victim of terror attacks in Israel and elsewhere. And it's like, okay, in Israel, yes, people do shoot rockets over into Israel, but Israel also shoots a bunch of rockets, yes, in retaliation to Hamas, and Hamas does plant rockets within like school zones and stuff. So then when they do retaliate, and Israel does have a fairly low casualty count compared to other countries when it comes to civilians, because they do like text message and try to get people out of the areas that they are going to bomb before they do bomb it. So it's not like they're just bloodthirsty people fucking over Palestine. Palestinians are not innocent, but we got to understand that after World War, I think it was II or something, all those Jewish people got put in the middle of a bunch of Muslims, and now we're just expecting it's gonna work out. That was a bad idea, and it's kind of has to do with I don't know, maybe people being fucking religious and shit, and thinking Jewish people are the chosen people, and that this is their land because Jesus or God said it, some stupid fucking bullshit like that. So it's some of the only reasons some people do support Israel, because it's like, well, God said it, and he said that's their land, and we gotta support it no matter what, even though they haven't lived there for hundreds or thousands of years, but we gotta put them there anyways, right? And it creates all of the persistent problems that we have now. Now we're kind of stuck, and it's because if you pull out completely, then yeah, it's just a matter of time before Israel gets wiped out by the other countries surrounding it. So it's kind of in a dilemma, right? If you don't help them, they're kind of fucked at this point, but they should have been put there in the beginning. On Wednesday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will apologize for the whatever because he's a fucking cuck. While the past cannot be changed, a sincere apology could be meaningful if Trudeau not only recognizes the widespread anti-Semitism of Canada's past, but also speaks to how our government plans to deal with anti-Semitism today. So, dum dum dum, here comes the fucking authoritarianism. We will never forget the past, and apologies most certainly will not heal all wounds, but honest tzutzva, Hebrew for repentance or making amends, could allow us to move forward in fruitful direction. See, and that's the whole thing that really gets me, because you want repentance from people who did nothing wrong to you. Do you find nothing wrong with going up to somebody's son, this guy, you loan this guy money, now you're going up to his son, trying to get the money out of him? You see nothing wrong with that? You think that's fine? No. And this is the problem with the government, with the state, the way it's run. People just think, well, they have the money, and they took it from us 100 years ago, and they should give it back. But it's that money is gone. It's been spent. Okay, there's new money has been created. You're fine now. Jewish people are doing great. Okay, in most societies that they're in, they're at the top of their fields. So to complain and shit even more, and keep bringing up the past to try to squeeze more out of people, it's just what the fuck is wrong with you? But And honestly, this is what creates more anti-Semitism, right? There's many factors, right? Yes, the Twitter censoring a bunch of people, forcing them to be in little echo chambers, grows it, importing a bunch of Muslim people into our country that don't like Jewish people, increases anti-Semitism, and shit like this increases anti-Semitism. Constantly beating like Germans over the fucking head with what they did in the fucking Holocaust, like almost 100 years ago now, is not the way to move forward. That's going to create more resentment over time. Okay, it's not how you move past problems, just, browbeating people. But whatever, the Prime Minister's apology to the Jewish community should therefore include a clear path forward on what will be done to deter the punish those who embrace or encourage anti-Semitism. It must also contain meaningful steps to educate Canadians, particularly our youth. So we need to indoctrinate the youth on the lessons of the Holocaust and their relevance to today's turbulent times. Okay, come on. Today, because Trump is in office, it's not relevant to the fucking Holocaust times, you crazy motherfuckers. This is more subtle fucking propaganda to try to make it seem like we're living in such a horrible fucking time. Yes, there are things that are problems that we need to deal with, but ultimately, we are all way better off than we were even 50 fucking years ago. We're living much more comfortably. Violence is down dramatically of all different stripes. Rape, murder, theft. So, a lot of this is just, trying to get people to be afraid and shit, really. Particularly our youth, on the lessons of Holocaust and their relevance to today's turbulent times. And, constantly talking about the Holocaust really fucking annoys me too, because we don't put the same amount of dedication to the Armenian genocide, right? Nobody barely talks about that. Is it because it was a bunch of whitish Christian people, right? There are many genocides. There's the communists did. Mao committed genocide, but nobody's really going to talk about that, because that would kind of expose their ideology, because they're like, oh shit, well, that's kind of what we want. So let's not focus so much on what Mao did and all these other genocides. Let's focus on the genocide of people from that were killed by nationalist type people, because nationalism equals Nazism, apparently. So anybody who's nationalistic, anybody who has pride in their country somewhat and wants to take care of their own people first, are going to become fucking Nazis, apparently, right? This is like the fear that they've had since World War II. So it's every country, specifically white countries, if they show a little bit of nationalism, then it's oh, Nazism, Trump is exactly like Hitler, Bolsonaro, and all these people, they're exactly like fucking Hitler. In terms of the past, we need to hear an apology for the institutional anti-Semitism that was pervasive in Canadian society at the time of the whatever St. Louis debacle. I hope Trudeau does not overlook Canada's shameful participation in the Evian Conference of 1938, when President Franklin Roosevelt convened an international gathering to discuss the plight of Jews trying to escape the Third Reich. Despite the conference, Canada cold-heartedly refused to accept even a single Jewish person. Whatever, man. That happened a long time ago. You can't keep fucking being mad and bringing this shit up, okay? That's fucking bullshit. Other people should not be doing it, and you should not be doing it too. I have absolutely no sympathy whatsoever for you. You didn't experience that, so shut the fuck up, and if you don't like it, go somewhere else. In contrast to Jewish refugees, Canada welcomed Nazis to our country by the boatload in the 1950s, often failing to prosecute or deport war criminals. Helmut Oberlander is the last known living Nazi in Canada, and I heard about this guy recently. This is why Bernard, and this guy, he was in the Nazi group when he was like a young teenager, right? Do you think he really had much concept of what the fuck was really going on? Do you think a lot of Germans weren't conscripted to go fight, right? And to do a lot of this shit? A lot of them were. A lot of them probably didn't want to do it. But it's like, if you refuse, you're most likely going to get shot in the face. Okay, so going after some guy who's like a 15 or a young teenager in the war and still like all these fucking years later, it is pretty insane to me. It just looks at, it's crazy how they're still going for this guy. This is why Birth Canada officially intervened in the most recent legal action against him, and yet, as I'm writing this piece, and despite having his citizenship revoked in court, he somehow remains in Canada in 1985. Like, this guy has been in Canada since, like, the 1950s, and it's like, oh, you want to send him back to Germany? He was like 96 years old. The federal government created the Deschênes Commission to investigate whether Canada had become a haven for Nazi war criminals. The report has never been released in its entirety. Why the delay, and what information is being withheld from the public? So yeah, right now he's insinuating that Canada was a hotbed for hiding Nazis, and we have a history of being Nazi Jew haters, and because of this, we got to impose authoritarian rule, but I'll get to that soon. B'nai B'rith own 2017 annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents registered 1,752 anti-Semitic incidents. So 1,752 incidents consisting of harassment, vandalism, or violence, a record high since our League for Human Rights began tracking the phenomenon in 1982. Phenomenon? Okay, racism is a phenomenon. Okay, but when you say it's anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism today emanates from the extreme left, extreme right, radical Islamists, certain Christian denominations, atheists, and many other sectors of society. So how are atheists anti-Semites? That I don't really get. See, that is probably just Richard Dawkins or something saying something bad about Israel and how they're treating Palestinians or something like that, right? Or something about Israel, and they're like, that's anti-Semitism, right? And I looked at these numbers at their site, and they're like, the massive increase was due to vandalism. So you know how easily people could just not actually be anti-Semitic and just try to make it look like anti-Semitism is rising, and just look at hoaxes when it comes to this. There's so many being exposed all the time. These are not unique. And then it goes on, anti-Semitism today emanates from the extreme left, blah, blah, blah. Canada can take specific and necessary action to combat this growing trend. So this is where it gets a little interesting. The federal government must acknowledge the growth of Holocaust denial. So this is one. Nazi and neo-Nazi glorification, Holocaust obfuscation, and challenge this wherever it occurs, both inside and outside the country. To achieve this, Canada must increase awareness of and formally adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, and this would serve as both a symbolic and pragmatic demonstration of Canada's commitment to anti-Semitism. So yeah, I looked this up, and I'll read what their definition of it is. So it's like calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of radical ideology or extremist views of religion. So yeah, sure, okay, yeah, that is anti-Semitic, but I still think it should just be like racist, making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or the power of Jews as collective, such as especially but not exclusively the myth about the world Jewish conspiracy, or the Jews controlling the media, economy, the government, or other societal institutions. So it's like, yeah, saying that all Jews are a part of a conspiracy and stuff, that is, you could say that's racist or whatever, but we gotta admit they do control a lot of the media, economy, government, societal institutions. So is it anti-Semitic to bring that fact up? I would assume a lot of them would say it is. Accuse Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoings committed by a single Jewish person or group, or even for acts committed by non-Jews. So yeah, why would you don't describe ills that other people didn't do, like that's the whole thing. You don't blame the sins of the father on the son, but denying the fact, scope, mechanism, gas chambers, or intentionally the genocide of Jewish people at the hands of National Socialist Germany and supporters and accomplices during World War II, the Holocaust. So you can't be a Holocaust denier, and you can't even question the numbers, the scopes, or even the mechanism, gas chambers that were used. So, all this really does, it doesn't prevent anti-Semitism. It just increases it, right? Banning people, silencing them, just makes them think that their position has more strength, makes them think that what they're saying is hitting a chord, so then that's why they're being censored. So you're just validating and likely increasing it. Accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations. And this is essentially true of most people, especially most immigrants. A lot of them, and like let's say I'm immigrate to America from Canada. I'm gonna have more allegiance to Canada. I'm sorry, unless I completely give up my love for Canada. It's going to be really hard to disassociate that. But if I grew up in America my whole life, yeah, I would, and that's the same with Jewish people. If they grew up in America their whole life, a lot of them don't love Israel. They don't put Israel above everything else. That is a lie. That's bullshit. Some of them do, a lot of them don't. So applying double standards by denying the Jewish people of their right to self-determination, e.g. by claiming that their existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. So, so you say you disagree with the existence of Israel. So I don't really think that is necessarily anti-Semitic, because there's a lot of history into the creation of Israel and what they're doing now. If you're against what they're doing, then what you're anti-Semitic. Applying double standards by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation, using the symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism claims of Jews killing Jesus or blood libel to characterize Israel or Israelis, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policies to that of Nazis. Well, I don't see the problem with that, because in my opinion, a lot of what Israel is doing a lot of the times does resemble what kind of like the Nazis were doing, honestly. They made a bunch of people, I think, recently, like second-class citizens and shit. Like, there's a reason why Ritter Spencer says he respects Israel, okay? There is a reason for that. He does like Israel. He said it himself, where he's like, oh, well, I don't love Israel, but he's like, I agree with kind of how their nation is run, right? Because he kind of, wants that for himself. Holding Jews collectively responsible, and then anti-Semitic acts are criminal acts when they are so defined by law. For example, denial of Holocaust, anti-Semitic materials in some countries. Criminal acts are anti-Semitic, and yada yada yada. But go on with the article, and it keeps going on. Anti-Semitism today not only expresses itself as hatred towards the Jewish people, but manifests itself in applying double standards to Israel not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. For example, the anti-Semitic boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement regularly impact Jewish students on Canadian university campuses. Adopting the definition would help in effective combating such anti-Semitism. So whatever. The government should, with Canada's provinces and territories and recognized Holocaust education institutions, introduce mandatory education about the Holocaust and its impact on the world's Jewish community. And I'm pretty sure we already all learn about the Holocaust in school anyways. I know I did. But our record on education about the Holocaust and the lessons it holds for today is uneven and unacceptable. The government could commit to developing and implementing a national action plan to combat anti-Semitism as other countries such as Norway and France. The government should carefully reread the annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents and should pay specific attention to our 8-point plan to tackle anti-Semitism, which offers concrete and achievable proposals to counter hate in Canada. And this is the most interesting part, essentially. And I'll go through that. In the wake of Pittsburgh, evolving conversations speaking to the security of Jewish institutions, synagogues, and other at-risk facilities will need continue with government. So, so they're like, yeah, we need to depend on the government to protect Jewish facilities. But, that's the thing. The government, if they're going to do that, then they're going to have to protect everybody. They're going to have to protect mosques. They're going to have to protect Hindu temples and churches, because to just discriminate and be like, we can only protect Jewish places is bullshit. Considering even it was a mosque, temple, or mosque that where all those people were killed a little while ago. So, but I'll read the 8-point plan, which is pretty fucked up, I have to admit. So the first thing, this is by Bryton Cherrier. Institute dedicated hate crime units in every major city. So they want us to become like the UK in London, wasting all of our resources looking for stupid fucking hate crimes when they could be solving actual murders, theft, and real crime. Provide enhanced training for hate crime officers, to just make them better at finding hate crime. Publish the Attorney General's guidelines for Section 318 and 19. So what was this exactly again? Is a strategic lawsuit against public participation. So yeah, this is what they were talking about in the article, which I just mentioned. What was it here? But the 8-point plan was Section 13 and 18, 318 and 19. The Attorney General's decision-making process on hate propaganda prosecutions is currently opaque and open to charges of political bias. Publicizing the internal guidelines will help human rights groups know when to complain to police and help Canadians stay on the right track. But what I looked up with this, that was a different thing actually looking up. But I don't know, it's some stupid shit. Develop an action plan to counter online hate. Revealed by both the 2017-16 audits, hate speech targeting Jews and other groups has flourished online, especially on social media, in the absence of prior Section 13 of Canadian Human Rights Code. A fresh federal strategy is needed. So essentially just censoring people, which is not going to do anything. It's just going to make the problem worse and probably actually create violent deaths of people of Jewish descent, as we saw with that fucking guy in Pittsburgh who's like, screw your optics, I'm going in, and that was because probably him being censored and not being exposed to other people, other ideas. Declare a zero-tolerance approach to government funding of anti-Semitism. It is bad enough when private individuals promote hatred against Jews, but even worse when they do so with public funding or sponsorship. So yeah, I'm against government stealing your money to begin with, but I'm against them stealing it and then funding groups that are truly racist or anti-Semitic, like a lot of these Islamic groups, which they shouldn't be getting money either. Introduce anti-slap legislation in all provinces. And this is what I want to get to. It's like Ontario and Quebec currently possess legislation against slap. Strategic laws against public participation. Extending this protection across the country would make it easier for human rights groups to call out bigots and extremists when necessary to advance public discourse. So I looked this up, just the beginning of it, and is a lawsuit that is intended to censor, intimidate, and silence critics by burdening them with the cost of a legal defense until they abandon their criticism or opposition. So just to bury them in legal fees because of their speech. Such lawsuits have been made illegal in many jurisdictions on the grounds that they impede freedom of speech, which they 100% do. So in the typical slap, the plaintiff does not normally expect to win a lawsuit. The plaintiff goals are accomplished if the defendant succumbs to fear, intimidation, mounting legal costs, or simple exhaustion and abandons the criticisms. In some cases, repeated frivolous litigations against the defendant may rise the cost of directors and officers' liability insurance to that party. So yeah, they just want to make it so they can sue you into kingdom come, and guess what? A lot of these Jewish groups are fucking bankrolling, man. Like, if a Jewish person accuses you of discrimination, be sure that they're going to have B'nai B'rith and all these other groups coming in and funding their lawsuit forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, right? There's not just Jewish groups that do this. There are illegal immigrant groups that, probably George Soros funds, and, that go, and like a bunch of other these activist fund that go and pay off legal fees for illegal aliens and pay their fucking court cases and fund all this shit for them. So, you do not want this whatsoever, because, good luck. Free speech will be essentially killed, because anybody who says something should be brought in court, and they're going to be made poor by these groups. And to apply it, like, this is insane. So, you know, after every tragedy, you know, they got to use it to create a fucking authoritarian fucking state. Hold universities accountable for campus hate speech or anti-Semitism. Almost all universities in Canada are publicly funded and ultimately answerable to provincial ministers of advanced education, such as the government in Ontario stepped in to tackle campus sexual violence in 2016. Provincial governments need to take ownership of the epidemic of anti-Semitic inclusion sweeping our nation's universities, adopt a national action plan for anti-Semitism. As demonstrated by the findings of the audit, anti-Semitism remains a persistent scourge of the region of Canada, yada yada yada. Become like France and Norway and become a fucking authoritarian state and ban anybody who says anything that you dislike, essentially, is what they're getting at. So, you know, as we see, these fucking events will always just be used to create fear in people, make them afraid, and make them think that the only solution is a bigger government, is to take away more of your rights, is to take away your freedom of speech, and to silence people on the internet and all this shit. Like, this is not how you prevent hate and from these types of things from festering. You know, that is through dialogue, because once we stop talking to each other, the only thing left is violence. But, you know, that's all I pretty much had to say. Sorry the video lasted so long. I really did not intend it to last for so long, but if you like my content, subscribe and have a good day. See ya.